You may recall that in my last commentary I spoke about a somewhat provocative idea, using the model of Bill Clinton, who Toni Morrison famously described as America's first black president, as a kind of standard for special interest pandering and identity politics. It seemed to me that a reasonable argument could be made that Barack Obama would qualify as America's first Muslim president. And it's not, as I made clear in my last commentary, a couple of columns that I've written, I'm not saying he is a Muslim. And to be honest with you, I don't care whether he is or he isn't. This is not about how the man relates to his creator. That's his business. What he does in terms of policies, particularly policies that give special preferential treatment to any religion, and especially that do so in ways that infringe upon the rights and freedoms of the rest of us, well, that's our business. And I think the evidence is continuing to accumulate that that's precisely what President Obama is doing, and he's doing it, most worryingly, with respect to not only what he describes as the Muslim world, but with respect to policies that seem to track in very troubling ways with the agenda of one of the most insidious, most dangerous elements within that so-called Muslim world, namely the Muslim Brotherhood. I mentioned in my last commentary, I think, several examples that come to mind. The president talks about being priority for his presidency to ensure that Muslims are not the victims of hateful stereotypes. He talked about ensuring that women of the Muslim faith can cover their heads and presumably their faces on religious grounds, even, I guess, when they're having their photographs taken for identification purposes. An absurd idea. And then he, of course, in Cairo also promised to provide latitude for Muslims to engage in zakat, the practice of tithing under their faith, even though 4 out of the 8 grounds for such tithing lend themselves to support for jihad and those who engage in it. And certainly there are any number of instances in which zakat has flown through charities that were engaged in material support for terrorism. Successful prosecutions have closed some of them down. I'm sure that others are still operating in exactly that way. And now the president seems to be lending his imprimatur to that practice and thereby presumably making it more difficult for our law enforcement agencies to prevent it. Speaking of which, immediately after his Cairo speech, the Attorney General of the United States pronounced, and this is worth a quote, that he was going to undertake, quote, a return to robust civil rights enforcement and outreach in defending religious freedoms, unquote, with a view to, quote, using criminal and civil rights laws to protect Muslim Americans, unquote. Now, on the face of it, that would be unobjectionable as long as the same protections are being afforded everybody else, and they should be. But also, it suggests that somehow that hasn't been the case heretofore. I don't believe that's true, and it seems to play into, again, a leitmotif of the Muslim Brotherhood's stealth jihad in America, which has as one of its characteristics exploiting the very civil liberties and other protections that the Attorney General just talked about here as a means of undermining the society and the Constitution that provides them, which, of course, under Sharia, the totalitarian, theopolitical, legal, military program that authoritative Islam seeks to impose on all of us, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, and that the Brotherhood espouses, that program would, unfortunately, of course, eliminate all of the civil rights and freedoms that the Attorney General is duty-bound, oath-bound to protect for all of us. These are, of course, just a couple of examples of many that we could cite in terms of this kind of, as I say, special interest pandering and identity politics that President Obama is engaged in since literally his first day in office. Unfortunately, pointing this out has put me in the crosshairs, apparently, hope not literally, but certainly figuratively, of people who are very upset at the moment. Upset not just with me, I guess I'm in very distinguished company. They're very upset with Bill O'Reilly. They're very upset with Glenn Beck, both of Fox News. They're very upset, of course, with the king of talk radio, Rush Limbaugh. They've expressed their upset with Jon Voight, the Oscar-winning actor, and even the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, all of whom, along with yours truly, have been tagged in numerous blog postings and television interviews, and now not one but two New York Times columns as an enabler of right-wing extremism. Now, it's really striking if you look at these two columns, one last Thursday by Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist turned columnist at the New York Times, the other by Frank Rich, a longtime movie critic and now columnist for the Times on Sunday. These two columns, which made this general allegation against me and these other worthies, are almost identical. Basically the same structure, basically the same content, certainly the same tone. A tone that seems, in part at least, aimed at vindicating a recent outrageous report in the out of the Homeland Security Department, which claimed that there was this incipient, violent extremism that conservatives and talk radio guys, I guess, television hosts, pundits, columnists, and the like, and not least returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, were likely to foster into some kind of insurrection or other acts of instability and perhaps mayhem. This is an outrageous slander against all of those who have been so identified. I think the fact that there's so transparently a script that the aforementioned bloggers and MSNBC professional haters and New York Times columnists and the rest have engaged in, have utilized in their critique of folks like myself, raises an interesting question as to who's writing these scripts and whatever happened to the kind of journalistic integrity that would cause someone to do their own research, to write their own columns, think for themselves. Not knowing the answer to what's happened or who's writing these scripts, let me just focus on one bottom line. It seems to me that what is going on here is an effort to achieve what happens to be probably the first, certainly the foremost objective of the Muslim Brotherhood and its friends in America at the moment. And that is an effort to suppress free speech. And it doesn't matter who's president, to whom they pray, what they believe, or where they would like to take this country. That's unacceptable. Thanks for listening.